Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's start the class with some prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhu Bhuva Swaha Tat Savitravarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yo Nah Prachodayat Asto Ma Satgamya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya Mrityorma Amritam Gamya Om Sehna Vavatu Sehna Bhinaktu Saviryam Karvavahi तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहि ओम शांति 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 Vivekachudamani. Our last verse of our last class was 340. Could be different number in your books, but the translation of that verse is to recognize the entire universe as the self is the means of release from all sense of bondage. Okay, so we are here to remove the bondages. So he is giving us the means to do it. There is nothing higher than realizing the universe as the self. One realizes this state by excluding the objective world through steadfastness in the eternal Atma. Okay, so what he's talking about? Meditation. That is the way. Expand and realize that all is the self. And outer expression of that is love for all, compassion for all. Recognizing everything is nothing but God. There are moving temples around us. So when we come to experience this, the self in me is the self everywhere. That is the liberation, he says. Okay? So liberation while living. Then he says there's nothing superior to this experience. Because if somebody might wonder that what is better than this, he says nothing. This is the ultimate. Na paro astim kaschit. There's nothing else beyond this. This is the pure spiritual experience. And another Sanskrit term for this is a Sarva Atma Bhav, the vision of the universe as the self. Let's start the class with 341. Drishasya agrahanam katham nu ghatte de atmana tishtata bahe arth anubhav prasaktaha manasaha tat tat kriya kurvataha sanyast akhil dharam karam vishay nitya atmanishtaha pare tattva gyay kar niyam atmani sadanand ichubhi yatnataha. Drishasya, that is the perceptible world, the drishya. Agrahanam, non-apprehension. So like a non-grasping. Agrahanam. Katham, how? Nu means indeed, ghatte, possible. Deha atmana tishtata, one who remains identified with the physical body. Deha atmana tishtata. Bahe arth anubhav prasaktaha manasaha, whose mind is attached to the experience of the external world. Bahe means outside. Okay. Mind is attached to the experience. Anubhav. Anubhav is the experience. Okay. Tat kriya kurvataha, who performs various actions for those ends. Sanyast akhil dharam karam vishyaha. By those who have renounced all kinds of duties and the sense objects. Sanyast akhil. Akhil means all. Dharam karam vishya. Nitya atam nishtha pare. Who are ever established in the eternal self. Tattva gya hai. By the knowers of truth. Those are the sages. Karniyam should be practiced. Atmani, in the mind. Sadanand Ichubhi, desirous of eternal bliss. Yatnataha, carefully. It's a pretty long verse. When you look at it, it looks very complicated. But when you really look at word by word and try to understand, it's very simple. How is the exclusion of the objective world possible for him who lives identified with the body, whose mind is attached to the perception of external objects, and who performs various acts for that end? So clearly in the first line, he is telling us, whatever goal is, make sure you keep your mind on that goal. If your goal is the external objects and you are doing all your actions also for that end, you are not gonna reach the ultimate goal. Let me read it again. How is the exclusion of the objective world possible for him who lives identified with the body, whose mind is attached to the perception of external objects, and who performs various acts for that end? This exclusion should be carefully practiced by sages who have renounced all kinds of duties and actions and objects, who are passionately devoted to the eternal Atma, and who wish to possess undying absolute bliss. So if you are certain that you want this goal, ultimate goal of life, this exclusion should be carefully practiced. So that means, first of all, disidentify yourself from the body. And all the actions you are doing, all the karam kand also. See, he says, sanyast akhil dharam karam vishya. So whether it's a worldly duties or the sacred duties, don't do it for the physical body and the physical pleasure. This is the exclusion he's talking about. Otherwise, the non-apprehension, which is agrahan of all misapprehensions, cannot be if we keep on identifying with the bodies. Because body is just a means, it's the equipment. So the state of objectless awareness cannot be experienced by a person whose attention is turned outwardly all the time. It's called a bahya vritti. Instead of bahya vritti, we got to turn it around into the antarmukhi, inner vritti. So identification with the physical body, what happens? Our mind is constantly contemplating upon the sensuous objects then. So he says, change this direction. Don't let your mind just keep on going into the outside world. How can you have the non-apprehension of the world, worldly objects? without this. When we are striving in meditation and we are propelling ourselves towards the higher consciousness, then even all the ego prompted secular as well as the sacred activities of the lower plane must stop. Okay, that's what he's recommending. Okay, it's not only for the select few sages. It's we, if we have decided this is our goal, then we must do that. Secular as well as sacred. Okay, worldly duties also and godly duties also. Otherwise, there's a rift. When we go to the temple, we think differently. When we come into the world, we think differently. No, both ways, no matter where we are. We should not lie and cheat when we are in a sacred place. We should not lie and cheat when we are at a workplace also. Okay, that's what he's talking about over here. The secular and the sacred activities that we take, and we use various objects, constantly live in the contemplation of the Atma, the Brahman. Inside the house, outside the house, with our relatives, with the people we don't even know. Brahm everywhere. The same Atma everywhere. Okay. Let's look at 342 now. Sarva Atma Siddhye Bhikshoho Krit Shravan Karmanaha Samadhim Vidhatihi Eshaha Shantaha Dantaha Iti Shruti. Sarva Atma Siddhye, for realizing that all is the self. All means the entire universe. Bhiksho, to the sannyasi, Krit Shravan Karmana, who has listened to the discourses. Samadhim, the samadhi, Vidhatihi, prescribes, Eshaha, this, Shantaha Dantaha Iti, he who is calm, self-controlled, etc. Shruti, the Upanishads. To the sannyasi, who has listened to the discourses upon the scriptures and who has cultivated calmness, self-control, etc., to him the Shruti prescribes samadhi for realizing that the whole universe is the self. Sarva Atma Siddhi. This is a very famous statement from Brihad Aryanak Upanishad. In one line, it's indicating what a seeker must do in order to make himself fit for the final spiritual experience. And he is referring to those 6 qualities which have been mentioned in the beginning of the scripture and repeatedly mentioned also. Because we need to cultivate these qualities diligently. That's why this great teacher keeps on repeating it to us. That's how we discipline our personality. Because we live in this personality, we need to take care of this personality. Otherwise, this personality takes us away from our goal. And what are those 6 disciplines? Sham, Dam, Uprati, Titiksha, Shraddha, Samadhan. You remember that? Sham is the calmness. And again, he's talking about Shantoho, Dantaha. Sham, calmness. Dam, self-control. Uprati, mind withdrawn from all objects or the lower emotions, lower attachments, uparadi. Titiksha, capacity to suffer silently. When all the pinpricks of the life come, endure them. And then Shraddha is the faith in yourself, in the Shastras, in the Guru, in the reality. And Samadhan, contentment with what you have been blessed with, Samadhan. So when you have these qualities, you have cultivated, as a seeker, you will find that spiritual realization is very simple. Because the real work is only at this point, actually. Then he says, turn your entire attention upon yourself and realize it directly. Atmani ev atmana pashyat. But then in this verse, in the first line, he is giving us two supplementary qualities, which are very necessary if you want to move up. If you want to experience the self, that one self which is present everywhere. He said he must be a bhikshu, renouncer. That doesn't mean that we have to go outside and become a bhikshuk. This really means a renouncer, non-attachment completely. And this is a mental non-attachment. Nothing is mine. Bhikshu. And the second one, he says, listen to the discourses upon the scriptures. See, when he says bhikshu krit shravan karmana, we have to keep on adding new water there. As long as we have a mind and the intellect, if we don't put that clean thoughts in there, what the scriptures are telling us, then there's always a chance for us to have dirt in there, flaw in there. So that's why he has added these two in there. A bhikshu is a person who has renounced everything, lives with a bare minimum of objects, which just come to him without making much effort. That's a bhikshu. And the second one, where he says, listen, that is really means jigyasu. Because if we are a jigyasu of that higher only, then we will be hungry for listening or understanding the words of these saints, the yogis. Such an individual who has done enough sufficient listening to the teacher, performed enough selfless, dedicated activities, that means rubbed off all the old vasanas, samadhi is not far. That experience of that self and self everywhere is automatic. And it is prescribed again, I would say, in the Brihad Aryanak Upanishad. And it's one of the very well-known statements. Next one, 343. Arud Shakte Ahamaha Vinashaha Kartum Na Shakyaha Sahasa Api Panditehe Ye Nirvikalp Akhe Samadhi Nishchalaha Tan Antraha Anant Bhava Hi Vasanaha. Arud Shakte Ahamaha, of the ego that has grown strong. Vinashaha, destruction. Kartum, to do. Na shakyaha is not possible. Sahasa, suddenly. Api means even. Pandite, by the wise person. Ye means those. Nirvikalap akhya hai. That is by the name of Nirvikalapa. Most of you are familiar with this term, Nirvikalapa. The Vikalap happens in the mind. Nirvikalap means there is no disturbance in the mind. Nirvikalap. Samadhi Nischalaha, who have become perfectly calm through Samadhi. Tan Antaraha, except them. Anant Bhavaha, effects of countless births. He means indeed Vasanaha. Okay. Even wise person find it impossible to suddenly destroy the ego. Because if we think that, gosh, this ego is really keeping a good grip on us, it is true. Ego is so subtle, so strong. It's very hard to let go. So that's why he says even wise person finds it impossible to suddenly destroy the ego. Once it has become strong, except for those who have become perfectly calm through Nirvikalap Samadhi. Okay? So it's not impossible, it is difficult. But when we have reached Nirvikalap Samadhi, then definitely ego doesn't have any hold on us. Indeed, desires are the effects of innumerable births. Okay? So there are two things he's talking about in here. One is about the ego. It is difficult, but hey, you can definitely, with the help of the sadhana, reach to that Nirvikalap Samadhi, then it's easy. But as long as we have the ego, that means there are desires, then there will be innumerable births also. If you don't want to come here again and again, then definitely practice this Nirvikalap Samadhi. So the attitude of the individuality, it really arises out of the ignorance. And what is this ignorance, which is called avidya? That not knowing yourself. And this is what the ego is. That's why the very first thing is avidya. Then comes asmita. So when we don't know who we are, sure, ego is there. And then if we don't work on it right there, then definitely the offshoots of that ego, rag and dvesh, abhinivesh, all that also, those are side branches. Okay, so we have maintained this avidya over a long period of time during our slowly, sometimes we move up, then we just slide down. Sometimes we think we are evolving, but then we slide back. So this ego cannot be annihilated immediately. Okay? Nor is it at any time easy. That's what Shankaracharya is saying. Except those who have become steadfast in the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So if we make this as our goal now, in this lifetime, as a human being, I've been given this beautiful equipment. I want to reach Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Then he says, we have a chance. Otherwise, we can just move a little bit up and maybe slide back. So Nirvikalp Samadhi, we can go into the Patanjali Sutras also, study more about it, but over here, let me tell you, Nirvikalp Samadhi is the state of mindlessness. Vikalps are happening in the mind. When all the thoughts, they have been consciously eliminated and blissfully transcended, that is Nirvikalp Samadhi. So there has to be, you have to transcend that mind, rise above the mind. That's a Nirvikalp Samadhi. At this stage, merger with the God or the truth or reality or Brahma becomes complete. Okay, and that's how ego just goes away by itself. This is a very extremely blissful state, Nirvikalp Samadhi. Let's look at 344. Aham buddhyaha ev mohinyaha yojitvaha avrite balat vikshep shakti purusham vikshepyatihi tad gunai. Aham buddhyaha, with egoistic idea. Ev means alone. Mohinya, the deluding. Yojitvaha, connecting. Avrite balat, through the aid of the wailing power. Avarn, avrite means avarn shakti. You remember that avarn shakti and the vikshep shakti. Vikshep shakti is the agitation of the mind. Avarn shakti is the concealing part, covering part. So this is avarna. Vikshep shakti, the projecting power. Purusham, the person. Vikshepyati, distracts. Tad gunai, through the effects of that. So that means the agitation. The projecting power through the aid of the wailing power, because they go hand in hand. When something is veiled, you'll project something different. So that's why he's saying the projecting power through the aid of the wailing power confuses the person with the storms of egoistic ideas and distracts him through the attributes of that agitation. And where is the agitation happening? It's happening in the mind. So he's talking about these two powers over here. This is actually power. Power of wailing and power of projecting. So the power of wailing is over what? Intellect. It veils the intellect. Our intellect becomes incapable of apprehending the truth, what it is. That famous example of a rope and a snake. It is a rope, but you are projecting a snake over it. Okay? And what happens when you think it's a snake? There's a fear. So these three go hand in hand. Mind gets agitated whenever the intellect gets clouded. That means whenever we don't see anything clearly, mind will get disturbed. And mind just tries to project. And it does not project only one thing. And it's not only one thing happening, there's so many things are happening. It keeps on imagining further and further. This is the natural trick of the mind and intellect. At all times, actually, not only in the waking part, in the dream part also, we do the same thing. Mind doesn't want to get rest. And that's why a person suffers from endless agitations, endless sorrows, because mind has created all that. And that's why everyone we see, you talk to people, or you just even watch on the media, social media, everybody is unhappy or there is something which can cause them agitated. Quality and the quantity of unhappiness in accordance with the type of a person's vasanas. Okay, according to our own vasanas, we get affected by the outer world differently. But there's always some kind of a agitation in the mind. Okay, agitation, disturbance. And from this disturbance, we create our own unhappy world. Let's look at next one. Vikshep shakti vijyah vishmaha vidhatum nishesham avarn shakti nivriti abhave drig drishyo safut payo jalvat vibhage nashyet tat avarnam atmani च स्वभावात् नि संशयेन भवति प्रतिबंध शून्यः विक्षेपनम नहीं तदा यदि चेत मृषः अर्थे. After giving us a couple of simple ones, then he throws another big one for us, right? Vikshep shakti vijyaha. Vijay means a victory. Victory over the projecting power. Vishmaha, extremely difficult. Visham. Vidhatum, to achieve. Nishesham, perfectly without remainder. Shesh means remainders, what is left over. Avarna shakti nivriti abhave, in the absence of the elimination of the veiling power. In the absence, see abhav is absence. In the absence of the elimination, nivriti means elimination of the veiling power, avarna shakti. Drig drishyoho, between the seer and the seen. Drishya is the seen, drig is the seer. Safut peyo jalvat, like milk from water, clearly. Vibhage, when the discrimination is done. Vibhage, bhag means like when you separate something, vibhage. Nashyet, perishes. Tat means that, avarnam, veiling, atmani, over the atma. Cha means and, swabhavat, naturally. Ni sanshayen, undoubtedly. Bhavati, there is. Pratibandh shunyaha, free from obstacles. Vikshepanam, oscillation. Nahi, no. Tada means then. Yadi chet, that means if. Mrishaha, Mrisha is false. So Mrisha arthe, due to the false sense objects. So false objects. It is extremely difficult to conquer the projecting power unless the veiling power is perfectly rooted out. Okay. So veiling power. So if something is covered, we got to uncover it before we can know what it is clearly. That's what he's trying to tell us. It is extremely difficult to conquer the projecting power unless the veiling power is perfectly rooted out. And that covering over the Atma naturally vanishes when the subject is perfectly distinguished from the objects. So that means we got to know what is object and what is subject. We have been fooled thinking that the objects are the subjects. See, there has to be a clear understanding what is the drik and what is a drishya. Then he says, like milk from water. But the victory is undoubtedly complete, and it becomes free from all obstacles when there's no oscillation of the mind due to the false sense objects. So he says that mind keeps on shaking. And why the mind is shaking? Because of the vasanas. Why the vasanas? Because we think that this is the subject. What is object? We have just fooled ourselves that that is the subject. And mind keeps on shaking. And if the mind keeps on shaking, sure, there's a cover also. And we really don't know the reality. So we got to have a clarity between the subject and the object. We all know that the ordinary person, like an average person, I should say, cannot control his or her mind. Because we hear that all the time. Even Arjun, a great person like Arjun, perfect concentration. You remember at the time of Draupadi Swayamvar, he was the only one who could shoot in the eye of a fish while looking down in the reflection of the fish. That kind of a concentration. Best of the best warrior. What did he admit to Lord Krishna in the middle of the war? Chanchalam hi mana Krishna. He says it's so chanchal, it's so dridvat. It's like a vayu. I cannot control it. So that's why I'm saying that ordinarily a person cannot control his or her mind. We can conquer the world outside, but conquering our own mind is not an easy job. But as long as the veiling power is not completely removed, so we got to work with both sides. This veiling power, this awareness shakti, we got to remove that. Then the projecting power will naturally will have a control over it, projecting also, and project rightfully. What is it? So in other words, as long as there is a non-apprehension of the reality, the misapprehension will continue. If there's a dark outside, and you see that rope over there, and you will project snake on it. We will remain under the urges of these. As long as we think that these objects outside are real, they can give us the bliss, they can give us ultimate happiness. That's what we are projecting. That's why he keeps on telling us about these sense objects. We cannot stop this until the higher awakening is experienced. And higher awakening will be experienced only when we do the sadhana. When our attractions and enchantments of the lower planes of consciousness, we can have control over them. Otherwise, there's no escape. But once we have a glimpse of that divinity, that supreme, And God wants us to see that. God wants us to experience that ultimate. So we have to do our part to just make that our goal. So to gain a total mastery over the agitations of the mind, sure, it's not easy. It takes time. It's not that today we started doing meditation and tomorrow we have reached there. No, it will take time. As long as the cause of the disease exists, the symptoms of the disease cannot end. And he is telling us again and again what is the cause of the disease is. As long as if the flesh will crave for flesh, as long as the mind will keep on craving the emotional satisfaction, as long as the intellect will gurgle out into the countless desires. So we got to remember that. We got to learn how to control this lower in order to get attached to the higher, to experience that higher. So that's why this great Rishi keeps on telling us that non-apprehension of reality cannot be ended by those who have the capacity to just stay attached to the lower. Then he uses using this example over here, analogy of water and milk. There is a mythological bird, Hans. Hans. Aham means I am. Sa means he. So it becomes a Hansaha. To realize I am he. That is a Hamsa. And they say there's a bird who can, Hans bird, can separate the water from the milk. So that means clearly seeing what is the absolute and what is not. And we got to have that kind of a clarity, that kind of understanding. So intellect starts discriminating between the subject and the object. Drig is the subject and the object is the drishya. When you start realizing that you are the subject, one who is aware, and that these objects are all in you, and when they are removed, they say that you have the objectless awareness. What happens? You don't get involved in them. You stay distilled away from them. You don't have any more deluding confusion. And as a result of this, the pure self is revealed without any special effort. And in that kind of experience of the self, there can be no trace of doubt at all. There cannot be doubt. So it's clear, it's crystal clear. And that's when a person understands and realizes that the self in me is the self everywhere. There's nothing other than me. It's only one. There's no mental agitations. Then who will doubt? and you have transcended the mind, transcended the intellect. There's nothing to doubt about. How will you doubt? So in other words, when the individual wakes up to the higher planes of consciousness, he will have no more oscillations of the mind. And that's what he said, pratibandh shunyaha. See, nisanshayen bhavati pratibandh shunya. Even if all the tempting objects are out there, they are all there. It's not that objects will go away, they are there. But a person knows that they are all marish. They are false. They may look very glaring, very beautiful, but they are false. So this person at this level will not get attracted to any of those, has found the ultimate. Okay, so let's stop it here. And then we can have some discussion also. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.